We are speaking from our wounds. What you just did, that everybody just had an opportunity to hear, you were speaking for the wound. You were saying, okay, I've experienced this. I know the pain of not feeling safe. I know the pain of being discouraged. And I don't want that for any person on this planet, in our children. I do not want this for our children. That is speaking for the wound. You are no longer a victim then.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast called Now What? And here is where we look at various topics which support parents and caregivers alike. I'm your host, Yogi Patel, and today we're going to have special guest, a dear friend of mine joining us. Her name is Deborah Owen-Sohocki, or I should say, Dr. Sohocki. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I love getting the title of doctor, but I am not a doctor. I have a master's in counseling, so I'm a psychotherapist because I'm licensed to do that. But I appreciate that that added encouragement. So you never know, maybe one day. But I'm so honored to be here with you, Yogi. And as you said, we've been dear friends for a very long time. So I'm honored to be sharing this time with you. You had asked me to do a little introduction. So, first and foremost, I am a teacher. And maybe before I even am a teacher, I'm a human being, just like everyone else that's listening to this podcast. And as a human being, I've worn different hats and played different roles, just like all of you. And one of the roles is as a teacher. So I became a teacher in 1972, and my first job was working with children who were deaf. And then I got a chance to work with them, their parents. And then I went on to be able to have the opportunity to teach at every grade level, 0 to 3 on up to community college. Teaching is my joy, as well as facilitation. I'm also, as you know, a positive discipline lead trainer. I also have the honor to be a heart math coach and trainer. I have become so interested, as you have, in how do we help our families, including ourselves, to bring up a way of dealing with our children that is respectful to ourselves, to them, and to the needs of the situation. So that has become my passion of how to facilitate that, how to create more peace, real peace in our families today. So thank you for honoring me by allowing me to be here.
Yes. Well, Deb, we always have some type of a conversation. So we are not scripted. We are just shooting from the hip because this topic is really, really important to both Deb and myself. And one being mistakes. And we were just talking and we said, why don't we just talk about this so others can hear us? Because I often say, wow, we should have been recording that one, because we all share this common question, and that is mistakes. So today's topic we're going to be discussing is mistakes. What is a mistake? When is a mistake? How do we deal with a mistake? How do we support others with a mistake? And Deb, when you were just talking about your experience and you said your first job was working with children who could not hear. And I'm not sure if anyone listening knows, but I wear hearing aids and I lost my hearing probably 10 years ago. And I was told maybe 10 years before is when things were already happening and moving in this direction. I often am encouraged by you because when I say something and I don't get it, you know it. You are trained in that area and you're like, So usually I miss many sounds in a sentence that might be shared with me. And often I misunderstand and I get confused because other people's facial expressions might be, hey, what are you saying? So instead of asking questions, sometimes they're judgments. And when they're judgments, what happens to a person? Someone like me will just become a blubbering fool. I don't know if they will understand me. What did I say? Because according to me, what I shared was very clear. However, I forget sometimes that what I heard and what I shared might not be in alignment. So I walk around often saying, I'm sorry and I'm sorry. And you brought up, hey, but when do you think it's a mistake? And is it a mistake? So tell me a little bit more.
I appreciate it. Yes, if you all could have seen us before we started the recording, we were just all of a sudden becoming very passionate about this. And I want to say something right now, Yogi. If I talk too fast, because I tend to talk too fast, I have found that growing up in a Western culture in the north of the United States, we tend to talk very fast. When I moved to South Texas, Southerners have a much slower range of pace. So I needed to learn how to adjust. And this goes along with, was it a mistake that I spoke too fast out of my Ohio culture in the U.S. anyway? Or was it simply, I didn't know? And this is what you just brought up, is that if you are thinking, understandably, if you've heard something and you respond based on what you think you heard, and it wasn't correct, as we would say, but is it really a mistake? Because to me, a mistake is if I have worked with someone and I've taken time for training, let's say it's a child, and we're doing flashcards for mathematics. And I've been working on 2 + 2 = 4 and 2 + 3, all the twosies, as we used to call them when I was growing up in the 1950s. And if the child has been practicing for a long time and they do 2 + 2 = 5, that would be considered a mistake, because there had been time for training with the little popsicle sticks and all of that. And they could have been having a challenging day, maybe didn't get enough sleep or whatever. But if they had been taught that 2 + 2 = 4, then we could consider it a mistake, and they have the opportunity to learn from it. And they could even learn, oh, I need more sleep. All right. That would be something to learn. I mean, how many of us that are listening right now, okay, have known things, but if we're tired, if we're hungry, if we're stressed, okay, if we're in grief, it is hard to remember things that we know. So we might, even if we knew it, we might make a mistake, and to learn, oh, I need more sleep, or I need to eat, or I need to reduce my stress, or, oh, this is just reminding me that I'm dealing with a lot of grief right now. Those are where we say mistakes are opportunities to learn. But what you're talking about, and what we got so passionate about, is if you are with someone, including yourself, and you were exposed to a new challenge that you've never dealt with before. Okay. Even the challenges of listening to somebody you're working with, Yogi, that you may not have worked with before, and their speech patterns are more difficult for you to hear. Okay. And you might miss something. All right. And then when you respond with what you thought you heard, okay, that to me is not a mistake, because you'd never worked with a person before. Okay. Their speech patterns may be very different. Okay. It is, as we were talking before, difficult to lip read. Okay. And I know you work hard at that because you really pay attention. But to me, that isn't a mistake. That simply was the setting. And in that setting, you could not succeed. But to me, it's not a mistake. That's just how I saw it. We were sharing that earlier. The other thing is that a challenge that comes along, for instance, I don't know how many of our listeners are used to coming from homes where in their own pain, our parents expected perfection. for whatever reason, depending on the cultures we come from, many different cultures, because they have collective ancestral trauma, that they've come from cultures that experience some form of genocide, let's put it that way, or a lot of trauma. Okay, then those families who have immigrated to the U.S., to them, the success of their children is one way to almost annihilate their own pain in the past trauma. So they put a lot of pressure on the children to make good the culture, the family name, etc. Are you following me so far? Because I'm talking awful fast.
I'm following you very much so. And that, what you just said, and second languages.
And second language. I mean, there's just so much involved with all of that. You're right. Second languages, again, I'm going back because I'm doing a lot of study right now in trauma. And in order for us to really heal personal trauma and collective trauma, we have to stop looking at things as mistakes and begin to realize that people that we encounter so often are a product of the unconscious pain and unconsciousness of family traditions even. Mm-hmm. When you have a culture, all of us come from different cultures. And even our own family system is its own culture, right? So if you think about that, the way I learned certain things in my family was that on New Year's Eve, we might stay, my parents always stayed out and celebrated with their good friends, the Willigs and the Gillilands, up until midnight. And they would crack champagne and celebrate. And all the kids from the different families, the three families, we would all be upstairs, supposedly asleep. But of course, we were listening to our parents get tipsy as they were drinking. And then at the end, at 1:00, everybody went home after lots of coffee, I remember. And then they supposedly would come upstairs and we would pretend to be asleep and they would take us home. That was my cultural way of celebrating the new year in the U.S. culture, in the Western culture. So, Trent, now I'm engaged to be married. And I am celebrating New Year's Eve without my fiance. And so my parents and the Gillands and the Willigs and the Wells family, they were all celebrating. I was the only college person there. Well, I just graduated college. And so I was feeling lonely. They were all in their 50s, 60s, and I was in my 20s. And so I thought, I'll call my fiance and wish him Happy New Year. So I call him at midnight and I wake him up. And he said, what are you calling me about? And I said, well, I wanted to wish you a Happy New Year. He said, I was asleep. Let me go back to sleep. He hung up. Now,
tell me more.
Is that a mistake? Or was that something that I didn't know, that I was coming from my worldview of how you celebrate New Year's Eve in my family system and the family system of the friends that my parents were friends with? So is that a mistake? To me, that wasn't a mistake. It was simply, I didn't know. When you aren't hearing people and you think that you've heard, or you would have asked. If you didn't think you heard, you would have asked. But if you think you've heard, okay, and you respond from what you think you heard, in my belief system, the way I am seeing the world right now, that is not a mistake. That simply was you didn't know.
That's right.
Often, even though those of us who practice positive discipline, those of us who study Alfred Adler's theory, those of us who have faith traditions that are based on some form of forgiveness, we still implicitly have a bias about mistakes. because many of us have been, my mom especially, and my dad both, from their own culture, from their own pain, I was supposed to make them shine as human beings. If I either made a mistake or didn't know how to do something, okay, didn't have a clue, and they felt shame if I didn't know what was going on or that I did make a mistake, then I was not loved. And many people out there, as we transform our way of seeing mistakes, we still come from that unconscious, many times unconscious bias about mistakes. Even though we say with our mouth, mistakes are opportunities to learn, then that unconscious bias prevents us from seeing when it simply was the person didn't know.
You have me thinking, especially as we work with parents and teachers and considering early childhood education for once. I'm just going to go through the ladder of different age groups, but birth to 6, how often, and I know that I am one of those parents who would have something that happens, we're exhausted in a major spill. And the first question we ask is, what did you do? Or how come you did that? And children having that responsibility. Why were you not paying attention? How many times did I tell you to learn this math concept or whatever that might be? And it puts the children into the mode of, and I'm seeing this clearly at my age, but when we look down at that young person, something just has happened and they're shocked and surprised. And then when we ask those, why did it happen? Or what were you thinking? And even if it's a what question, it's with a tone that makes it a really challenging. And we all talk about Dr. Daniel Siegel's brain in the palm of the hand. And when our emotions are raw, what happens to our brain? And the children at that age are just really vulnerable. Their brains aren't working, but that's when we start to ask more questions. And then when we lose it because they see our faces or when they see the disappointment and we want them to give an answer in that moment, having that moment to just now, hopefully after this podcast or more, as we grow and become aware, just looking at that child and saying, you must be feeling, and this happened. So if we just sort of validate what's happened for that child and then ask that student or our own babe, how would you solve this? What can we do to, clean up this mess? Or, I noticed that we practiced yesterday, but we need to practice maybe 2 more times or 3 more times or 3 more days. But it's a process and it's that learning. But when we turn it into, this is a mistake or you should have known better, that child stays in that confusion a little bit longer. I remember that as myself. When someone scolded me, either I wanted to really hurt them back because I felt so hurt. But that mistake could turn into a not valuable learning opportunity, but it can definitely turn into a stuck moment where you're not really growing. You can now be challenged with a connection that's lacking with your caregiver because that's where the trust is formed, right? And for that mistake, so if we look at the mistake, and if we do see it as opportunities to learn, or it was not a mistake, it's just you did this because you're a child, or you don't know this yet, or you're an adult, but that person might be experiencing something. It just shifts my mind in a different way to be able to ask questions. And the perception part, we already have the belief system and perception. So if the belief is the way I look, and I should be great at math, or my profession will be either a doctor or a lawyer, or I'm a certain professional, and I'm not. Imagine the position that would put me based on the way I appear.
Absolutely. So clearly stated, Yogi. And as you're speaking, what it reminds me of is that what I have found is that we adults, whether teachers or parents, or it could be grandparents too, though less likely grandparents, when we are working with children and they do something like you were saying, spill something. Okay. At that moment, what I have learned is what's going on for me right now? How am I responding? Why is it that I'm irritated with this child? Okay. Before I even open my mouth, because as you know so well, I'm sure you've had some podcasts on this, is that connection must always come before correction. It isn't so much you have to correct the child if they've spilled something, but wow, like you said, the curiosity questions. Oh, looks like we're going to learn how to clean the kitchen floor today, kind of thing. But in order to do that kind of response, and then later go through, did you notice what might have caused you to lose the grip on that? Maybe I didn't check to see how heavy that might be for you. Let's measure. Is this one easier for you to hold, or is it this one easier for you to hold? But to, as you said, to be very curious. The only way we can do that, though, is to step back. And I just heard a term as you were talking about Dan Siegel's flipping our lids. And of course, as you know, and hopefully our listeners know too, that this represents our limbic system. And I just heard a great term, Yogi. It's called, when we flip, we have limbic lava.
Limbic lava and all that explosion that comes with it.
Yeah. And then we are no longer the adult. We have become the age of when we were traumatized at spilling. I'm going to use the example, spilling something. We get into that usually when we yell, when we say mistakes are opportunities to learn, but unless we can look at ourselves and honor, hey, you know what? I didn't make a mistake here. I simply didn't know. When I was first married to the guy that didn't celebrate New Year's Eve, I always took a toothpaste and squeezed it in the middle. No one had taught me that you take a toothpaste and you do this. I just kept squeezing it until I couldn't squeeze it anymore. That's the way I did toothpaste.
Instead of pushing the ends.
Yes, instead of pushing the ends. Whereas my husband, was used to being very neat, and you just rolled it up and you never squeezed it in the middle. And it turns out he happened to be abusive. I didn't know that ahead of time, but he just blew up at me because why didn't you know to do this? And you should know to do. And I was like you. I totally, froze. I didn't want to hurt back at that point. I just froze because I became the little girl with my mother yelling at me. Mm-hmm. And now looking at it, I could have said, guess what? You have your way. I have mine. We'll have 2 rolls of toothpaste, but because I was coming from a background of freezing when I was yelled at, I could not respond that way. And so I did it the way he wanted and condemned myself for not getting it right. And I had no concept at that point that had nothing to do with not getting it right. I simply did it a different way. Yeah. And I had never been taught to do this. Now, of course, if Doug had said, hey, you know what? That really bothers me. Would you mind if we did it this way? Fine with that. That would have been training me to do something that would have made him happy.
Yeah, and that requires a conversation. It requires understanding the different perspectives that you were speaking about. In your home, you did things another way than how this person did it, which was squeezing the tubes from the end versus the middle. Small, but it had a lot of impact. And one thing that you did mention is trauma. What is trauma? And does everyone have trauma? Tell me a little bit more so I think our listeners could understand what trauma is versus everything is a trauma that doesn't feel good.
Yes, no, not everything isn't a trauma, but a lot of us carry some form of trauma in our bodies. Some of it is experiences, and there is no person on this planet that hasn't experienced some form of trauma. In my training, we have big trauma, which might be trauma that we see that the Hamas attack in Israel, that would have been a big trauma. What's going on in Palestine is a big trauma, a collective big trauma now. But personally, many of us can have big traumas, such as rape, such as incest, okay? But we also have small t or small trauma where our very identity is threatened, where our own uniqueness, and every human child, every soul on this planet has a uniqueness. But so often, because of our past generational experiences as parents, the way we were raised, we do not allow our children their uniqueness. Now, most of our indigenous brothers and sisters, they are very good at honoring a child's uniqueness. In many tribes, a child was watched and observed with love from the birth up until around the age of 7 to see what the uniqueness of that child brought forth for the good of the community, in this case, the tribe. And then they were guided into that. So if there is a little girl, let's say, or a boy, could be a boy too, who loved to tell stories, then they would become the storyteller of the tribe. They would be trained with the storyteller of the tribe to keep the tribe's history going. Let's say there's a child that was very good at wanting to help when someone was wounded, then that child would be guided to be a medicine person. Let's say a child was extremely active. That child would become a hunter. They would be guided to become a hunter. Okay, so our indigenous brothers and sisters knew that acceptance of that child, that unique child, was so paramount to that child developing and becoming a whole contributing member of the tribal community. Unfortunately, in Western societies, we've lost that. And so many children are born into families where they're told, oh, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a pharmacist, you're going to be a whatever it is, and we stop seeing the child in their uniqueness. So trauma begins when we are not seen. And Yogi, you and I have both talked about our own childhoods where we were not seen for who we were and honored for who we are in our own uniqueness. Mm-hmm. This is not about blame of our parents at all. I'm just talking about this is traumatic on our nervous systems.
When feeling unsafe, when feeling paralyzed, or feeling that you have no way out and stuck like between a rock and a hard place, per se.
Exactly. And then we adapt so that we can at least somewhat feel safe, even though we're adapting in ways that does not honor our uniqueness. For example, you were saying to me that you start to apologize when it isn't, you didn't do anything wrong, right?
Right. Misheard, misspoke, right? And it becomes this big hijack of the brain experience where I'm so sorry I didn't hear you and I answered you. And that is a unique thing. You are so right to bring us back to this point. I almost forgot that we become apologetic because the expectation is that when we speak or when we're teaching or when we're presenting or when we're in a workplace or in a school, all the teachers have to be a certain way. Parents have to be. So then it puts a lot of pressure on us having to get it right. So constantly we're worried, overwhelmed, trying to be perfect, which is, perfection is the enemy of good. And you're not even now going to get a little bit of an inch of a growth. And that's where we get stuck and overwhelmed. Yes. Go ahead.
And something you just said, it just went
ding.
Is that who are we getting it right for? And whose right is it?
Who made that rule up?
Who said that? I went like, wait a minute. We're adapting ourselves to somebody else's right. Now, 2 + 2 = 4. That's very visible, right? That's not subjective reality. That is objective. You know, if I take 2 here and 2 here and I put them together, we know that is 4. Okay. But anything else can be subjective reality. In other words, another person could be looking at you and hearing this and saying, you know, this is how I see it and you didn't get it right, but it's their right. And it's ignoring the opportunity for you to say, well, wait a minute, I see it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And why can't there be a right that you see and a right that I see? And so, you know, if it's subjective reality, now 2 + 2 = 4. If I say 3, then obviously that's a mistake. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. But if it's a way of handling something online with the technology, and you have a certain way to do it, and somebody else has a certain way to do it, both of you can be right. But if somebody condemns you or blames you or says, well, you should have done it this way, then they are coming from obviously here, but it's their right that they are judging you by. Instead of saying, that's an interesting way to do it. I've never done it that way before.
Hey, Deb, you just made your hand. So one was on the bottom and one was on top for our audio listeners. Describe what this just was.
Of course. So in Adlerian theory, okay, Adler said there's 2 ways of having relationships. Okay. And everything is a relationship. Nothing that we experience is outside of relationships. Even a relationship with ourselves is a relationship. Okay. So there was 2 ways to relate to yourself, to others, and to the cosmos. One is from a vertical relationship. Someone or a group, could be groups too, is on top, and someone, thank you very much. I love the ladder. I even have one that I can do with you. We can do our ladders together. So somebody is either some group or a person is on top and someone is on the bottom, as you just showed us. And then there's rings in between. So if we were looking at, let's say, a king, let's say in Europe, we'll talk about Great Britain. Okay, so there was the king and the monarchy, and then there were the noble people, and then there were the merchants, and then and then down here were the peasants or the serfs. But this is a vertical, as you said, a vertical relationship. The other way that Adler said, which is the one he believed we as human beings needed to work towards, and that was a horizontal relationship with others, okay? And that is not only a horizontal relationship with, like you and I, but also with ourselves and also with the cosmos, with the trees, with the fish that swim in the sea, with the water, the air, okay? All animals, you know, our indigenous brothers and sisters, their worldview is that the water and the air and the earth and the animals and the fish that swim in the sea, they are all our relations. They are our family. And that is a horizontal way of seeing the world in relationship. All right. So many of us have grown up in cultures that believe this is the way to go.
The ladder standing right up where the king was on top and peasant on the bottom.
Exactly. A lot of people around the world, not our indigenous brothers and sisters, but many cultures have believed that someone has to be on top and there's got to be this trickle-down effect and somebody's going to be on the bottom. Okay? In that relationship, those of us who are here are either not satisfied and will figure out a way to do this. Okay. As you know, the dignity double bind. or we will stay here because we want to avoid responsibility. And even though we may complain about those who are up here, we still give our power away and don't accept responsibility for changing things. This is the love of power over, and this is the power of love.
So when the hands are side by side in a horizontal way, this is where we are respectful to self and others and the community. What you also speak about is, the birds, the fish, the wildlife, and humans that we're separated by continents and water, but we're part of that one world where you matter. And even if we're online doing work now more so with folks from around the world, and again, this conversation about mistake keeps up, is when folks have different belief system, different languages, there's so much to know and grow and learn about that mistake. Do we see this person when they stumble or they can't find their words as just not knowing, instead of comparing to how others should be similar to us, or they have to adapt to us. And I think when we do that, that ladder, the vertical pops up where we believe that others are not doing it right, well, good enough, better. When you were just talking about me making a mistake, others might, like on a computer, right, with not being able to hear someone or not sometimes making mistakes with technology. And that happens to all of us. But then we put ourselves in that vertical relationship when we believe others might be thinking this way about us. So right there in that moment, even assuming that I feel shame, which is part of maybe what happened when my math was wrong, and we were talking about early childhood, and my teacher might slap me across my face and say it right, or on my head. Mm-hmm. But that's not helpful to self or others. And to look back, and I just did that with my previous teacher who really wanted to have me understand the math concepts more, but by hitting was the only way they knew. Not the right way. I'm not saying that this was, a good way for them to do it. But in that culture, in that society, at that time, this was the discipline that was used, and everyone did it.
Exactly. And you were asking more about trauma. Okay. So when you made the mistake, she had taught you, there had been some training. All right. And you added something wrong. Now, we don't know if it was because you were tired or maybe you didn't hear it properly or whatever, but you did it according to her. Her reality is you did it wrong. Mm-hmm. Her way of letting you know that you did it wrong was to slap you across the head. Now, that's a small trauma. That does something to your nervous system, Yogi.
Sure it did.
Yeah. And you become what we call hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
And so we're always looking for those who are going to judge us. That's the limbic lava. Okay. Right. That's the limbic lava. We're hyper vigilant, and we may see someone judging us when they're not judging us, but exactly. Because it's part of our nervous system, we cannot see differently.
And what you just said, the moment in which, what does a child feel? So I can visualize everything very clearly, and that's how I think, and that's how I learn, and that's how my mind works. And I remember in those moments not even having the question asked yet. I waited so my brain would shut down before my name was even called, because someone else just was being scolded or spanked. And I knew it was going to be my turn. So even if I had the answer, or even if I knew it, I sure did forget in the moment. And wouldn't you know it, that same pattern happens now when I put myself in that situation. That cognitive, therapy can definitely help, and does help most. And it's a growth process for me to now say to myself, not that young child. So I get into it and get out of it quickly. But that knee-jerk reaction, that brain, the emotions, that's an automatic response where the brain constantly goes. So as soon as similar stuff happens, though I'm aware of it, No one is spanking me or no one is hitting me. But when I make that mistake, because that's what it was called, when you don't get something right, that's a mistake. So I get that mistakes are opportunities to learn, or are mistakes really scary?
And why is it so important that we focus on the word mistakes? You know,
Made that word up. I want to know.
Yeah. This is something, and we were talking about this before we started the podcast. This is something that really is causing me to do a lot of thinking because, and I've worked through my stuff with my mom and my dad. So this is not about any blame. It's just understanding where this tremendous fear came from within me, that when a challenge would come, I would freeze because I was so afraid to get it wrong. It took me a long time before I realized that I was basing the wrongness on someone else's perception of what was wrong. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying, this is interesting, I don't know what to do, but I can learn. Oh my God, my whole body starts to relax. But it's like what you were saying, the first knee-jerk reaction, as we say in English. I hope anyone that is from another country or another language that's listening, it's an idiom where we just immediately go, boom. It's like on your computer, the default setting. An experience comes and you, boom, go right to, even though you know when you're conscious that is unhealthy, when it comes up, there's no conscious, it's just like bam, because it's part of your nervous system.
So automatic.
It's automatic. So it takes a little bit of time to create space. That's why heart math, any kind of breath work, yoga, many things that you do like mindfulness are so helpful because they create the space so we can see it from afar, from a distance, and then not without judgment, deal with it in an effective way, or learn to deal with it in an effective way with no blame, no judgment.
And the word shame comes up.
That's trauma. What you just said, shame. Go ahead.
When we have certain beliefs about right and wrong, looking good, looking bad, all of those, and then how we react from that onto a child, we are discouraging this little individual. And instead, what I would have liked when I made a mistake, because I definitely had lots and lots of encouragement, yet isn't it interesting? Those situations where there was severe discouragement create this pattern that is unhealthy for self. So the encouragement was so much higher that it allowed me to thrive. What if the encouragement was low and discouragement was high? This poor young children, when there is so much discouragement, they need one person or someone to say, you're going to be okay and I love you no matter what, or you're fine just the way you are. You're not made up of things you do. You are a person, a human being with two eyes, nose, and lips. That's why I wrote that book, that we're all alike more than we're different. And yes, our experiences make us unique, and thank goodness, otherwise we would be so boring because we would all be the same. And knowing that, we expect one another to behave in a certain way. And I am guilty of that because I know when someone does something different, I point it out like, do you know? And I have a feeling, and if I can say it, it's we don't know what to do with something that's different because we're all about polarities, because we feel safe when others are similar to us.
Such a powerful statement. This is why tribes form. And when the tribe is threatened, if you decide to be different, the threat is to be kicked out of the tribe. Yeah. And of course, that goes back to the belonging and significance that all human beings need. What you were saying about encouragement I can look back at my childhood and realize that I did not have encouragement. I got praise when I did what the perceived right thing was to do. I got praise when I made my mother and my dad look good. But there was always the threat, unspoken, that if I did not please them, then the love would be taken away. And it was taken away when I didn't please. So I did not have the experience of courage, because in order to develop courage or to allow courage to come forth, we need encouragement, because that draws forth the courage that is in every single soul. They just don't know it yet. It needs to be awakened, and encouragement awakens it. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s and I heard the statement, have the courage to be imperfect, that it was like my whole body, Yogi, reverberated, because I felt the truth of that. And it was something that I had not allowed myself to do. And that was when I began to transform. Now, it didn't happen overnight. I've been working on this since I was in my 30s, and now I'm in my 70s. But I guarantee it's worth the work. If people, you have to believe that. You have to have faith that it is worth the work. Because in order to get there, sometimes you really do need to examine your own pain. And that's scary. That's scary. Because the pain isn't just cognitive. It is in the body. What you and I both have experienced is that trauma in childhood of not being seen and accepted for who we were, and not being encouraged to be who we are. And that is trauma, and it's a form of generational trauma, because our parents weren't seen and encouraged to be who they were. Not all parents. Some parents had these wonderful experiences. I can give you an example. I don't know if you've ever seen the black and white photographs of a photographer, he's dead now, called Ansel Adams.
Adams, yep.
Okay, all right. So every school that Ansel went to, he was kicked out of. Every school. He was too active. Today, he would have probably been diagnosed as having ADHD. But back then, there was no such diagnosis or thing, but every school couldn't handle it. They kicked him out. Now, he was fortunate because his father was wealthy, and his father must have loved him and seen and believed in his uniqueness, because his father then began to teach him, we would call it homeschool today, and he would take Ansel into the forest and into museums. Everything was experiential learning for Ansel after getting kicked out of all these schools. And because of that, he was able to bring forth his unique creativity on this planet in the form of beautiful black and white photography. Just gorgeous, gorgeous uniqueness that no one up until that time had done. Okay, because his father was able to put aside his pride, I guess is the best way, and work with Ansel to help draw forth the best way that Ansel could learn with his particular unique way of being on the planet. If he had been forced and kept getting kicked out and then put into a reformatory or into a military school, who knows what would have happened? I doubt if that beautiful, unique creativity would have come forth, because he would have been said, you have to be like this. You have to be in this box. You have to be rigid. Okay? Because again, his behavior was considered by the schools a mistake. But was it a mistake or just his unique way of learning and needing to learn? Mistakes are often, we say, are opportunities to learn, but I believe especially in our conversation today, I believe that mistakes are people's judgment of what is right and what is wrong. And that's subjective. Now, 2 + 2 = 4. That's objective. But there's so many other things that we call mistakes that are subjective, what I would call subjective reality, in that it depends on who's making the judgment call.
And what you just shared about mistakes and expectations. As a teacher who's operated a school, and I was a finder of 2 Montessori schools, sometimes the expectations when we have a learner who has a different way of learning, or a student that has a certain ability, and then we have these expectations that our child does this, this, and that, and it puts a strain between the parent, the teacher, the school, the child in the middle. And sometimes the choices become very, very difficult. So again, I think it's having those conversations, having a plan, and just believing in the child and having that expectations too, that is not one-sided. And doing the work together.
Yes.
It is multifaceted. And with other countries and other communities and us growing and learning, we keep talking about, if something is different, then we're not being respected or we deserve more sometimes. I think it's and both. If we don't feel respected, eventually having that courage that you spoke about, and I want you to talk about courage a little bit more in a minute, but one of the points I wanted to make is I have to learn and I need to grow the courage so I can stand up for myself and say to another, hey, I'm having a problem in this area. And instead of, because I think often when we don't have the courage to go to that person, and sometimes, of course, we're wired in a unique way where we don't want to make somebody upset with us or not like us, but perhaps having that courage in that moment to be able to say to that person versus 5 other people what we don't like about that other person. Exactly. And that teaching our children that courage is the key. And I want you to tell us a little bit about the word courage, because it is Latin-based and it is in proper English, and this podcast is international and most people understand. But how do you develop courage? What does courage look like when a parent or caregiver, or when we have a certain way of looking at the world, and now we have expectations based on our culture? So for example, I live in this city, and this city, this is how things are done. And now with internet and technologies in the world, we're seeing and learning a lot of different things. Now we're becoming aware of all of this, but instead of judging a different culture or different community, and I want to clarify that culture is unique to each individual's family. So it's not different worlds, different languages, different skin colors, but it's also how we function within our family structure or in our work culture. So culture is thrown out very easily, loosely, and I want to be really careful about that. And I'll make a mistake, and I would love for you to correct me. I welcome, comments below if you think that, I should grow in some way, because that's why I'm here, to share and grow.
I would like you to consider that it isn't that you're making mistakes. You just don't know.
Okay, if I don't know it, let me know.
Yeah, let you know. Exactly.
What a great lesson here.
I say something that a lot of times, as you know, in the Thursday groups that you've been to, I'll say, hey, this is how I'm saying it, but, please correct me. Well, I'm using the word correct, but, let me know if I don't see something that I need to see, and use my language in a way that is respectful to you. I'm coming from where I know. And we've started now on our Thursday group, you'll laugh at this. We're doing a disclaimer at the beginning, and we're saying, today is the day, it is whatever the date is. And then we'll say, we just want you to know that whatever is said today in this group is where we are today, in the now. Okay. And a year later, it could change because we get more understanding. We get more information. We speak from what we know, right?
We're always growing and learning. And that's what you said.
Hopefully, yeah. And that goes back to courage, because courage is being willing to realize we don't know a lot, and that there's always more to learn. And it doesn't mean we're we're bad or less than. We are always enough, though most of us don't believe that on the planet, but we can learn more. We can always learn more. But there are some people who are so in pain, who have the worldview that they are victims. And unfortunately, as victims in their belief system, there's two ways to go with victimhood. One is with courage and saying, I don't have to stay here. Like you were saying, I don't have to go like this. I can say to this person, you know, what you said really bothered me. Okay. That's courage, Yogi. Mm-hmm. You have tremendous courage because those of you, I don't know how many of you have known Yogi before, but I have known Yogi and she keeps putting herself out there no matter how many times she's in some ways been mistreated. She doesn't give up. She keeps putting herself out there. She keeps learning more and growing and growing. That's an example of courage, Yogi.
Thank you for that.
It's been painful at times. It's been painful. Yeah. I know it is because your very essence has sometimes been, we won't say consciously attacked, but unconsciously attacked. And that is very, very, for anybody, that's very painful. But I know that's courage because you don't give up. So that's the difference between a victim who's given up and then they believe that their victimhood gives them the right to do it to somebody else. So it's like this, like what we were talking about before.
It's that set expectation.
Yeah.
Others need to do this for me to be happy. They're doing it to me. And that courage that you speak about, the heart, that comes from the heart. When we are not being useful, it comes from our mind. So when we are thinking these thoughts, which we're creating, because we are responsible for creating the thought. But when you just close that brain for a second and you reach the heart, and I know, Deb, you speak about this quite a lot and you taught me this, but when you look at your heart and just breathe through your heart, which is through heart math, and you look at the problem after you calm versus when you are in the highest stress moment, which is usually going to be a terrible thing. And I keep talking about it. And I think this is from nonviolent communication, the part of the amygdala, which is the reptilian brains, and reptiles ate their young, not the best time to make amends or teach a lesson, but to calm down and care for yourself.
Ourselves that space, you know. Bette Midler made popular a song, oh gosh, I can't remember how many years ago, the song From a Distance. And that really is when I can look at a challenge, like for instance, a challenge came up for me and I noticed that my response was from a fear response. And it was a decision I was going to have to make around money, which has been a challenge for me since, you know, I've been a child. So there's a lot of energy and triggers in my body around this issue. So when this challenge came up fairly recently, okay, my first response, and maybe those of us who are here and listening to this podcast, and you may agree with this, and that is my first response is I want to get this over quickly and just have it decided.
Put it under the rug.
Yes. Yeah. I want to deal with it and get it over with.
Gone.
But it was just what you said because I was so flipped because I was having that limbic lava of fear and fire. I realized that I would not be able to make a decision that was respectful to me, respectful to the other, and respectful to the needs of the situation. So what I did was I gave myself space. I told the person, going to be thinking about this. Promise I'll get back to you. Not sure when, because I have a very busy schedule, but I promise you I will get back to you. And I breathed into that space and I took a good 3 weeks before I got back to that person. Maybe it was even 4 weeks, so that I knew that what I said was based on respect for self, respect for the person, and respect for the needs of the situation. it took me that long. And for a while, I didn't want to look at it. Have you ever experienced that?
Quite often. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't want to look at it. Don't want to look at it. And yet I just said, I can do this, but I'm just going to breathe into it because that I was so hyper aroused and I was so scared, that I was going to make a wrong. See, I was judging myself, right?
Yeah.
That I was going to make a mistake. Okay. I had to distance myself for that length of time until I could come to a decision that I knew was respectful of me, respectful of them, and respectful for the needs of the situation. Does that make any sense?
So much so. And thank you for all this wonderful comments, conversations about, and being vulnerable and open to share, to grow. Because I know you and I both have this one thing that we want our audience, we're here to know that they're not alone. We're all on the same journey. We might experience it differently, and ways that we could hopefully hear one another and find courage or encouragement or ways to cope with different situations. But what you said makes perfect sense. And you said paralyzed. So how often something that happened, you said in childhood, and mistake or whatever the situation was, and we felt paralyzed. And then we're so capable and you could grow, but you become stuck.
Exactly. And if you think about it, that fear of, it was actually a survival fear, because as a small child, all of us, this is true for everyone, a small child is dependent on the caregivers. And unfortunately, it is really, this isn't the unfortunate part. It is truly, in my belief system, true of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, the belief that it takes a village to raise a child. Okay. I believe that with all my being. And so it is very difficult for so many parents who it's either just a mama, or it's a mom and a dad, or two partners, of the same sex. It could be that also. But the important thing is they're by themselves. And so they don't have the support of a village. And so in that, here's this child who is dependent on one or two people. And those people, for whatever reason, aren't able to be there for them. Okay, so the child then stops being who they are and adapts to be safe. So they stop being their authentic self, which is enough. They stop being that, and they say, I've got to always strive to be enough to please whoever these caregivers are. If we don't have an awakening, we're carrying that into adulthood. And so we cannot be authentic when we're constantly in that survival mode of, am I going to be accepted? Am I going to be loved? And it's coming, as you know, from the child, the little child within that is feeling that threat, not only in the amygdala, but also in the vagus, as you know about the polyvagal theory. It's also in the vagus nerve. That sense that there's no safety here unless I'm pleasing everybody in the group. And to be frank, it's impossible to please everyone, period. But when we've been trained, our nervous system has been trained that way as a small child, we carry that over until we get some insight, which is the first step towards developing courage.
And courage comes and goes, doesn't it?
It does. You've heard me say my courage is tired today. And this again is that a mistake? Or is that simply an honest, vulnerable statement that I need more rest? I may need support. I may just need to put everything on hold for a little while to recover. It's getting to know yourself and not judging yourself for not being 100%.
And who is ever 100%? And, I strive to be that 100%. I'm sure others who are listening here could probably
identify.
See that. That's the word, identify with me. This is just a perfect example. So I'm going to shift focus. So when I can't think of a word or when I can't be articulate, that can really get me spinning. Because why? I don't want to be wrong, look good, look bad, or look like I don't know what I'm talking about. But guess what?
About that. Yeah, but think about that. You don't feel safe.
Within that moment.
Yeah. And your only way of knowing to be safe is to be 100% and not ever misspeak or not hear something or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of your nervous system. So that's why I want everybody listening to know how much courage Yogi has, because even so, you keep putting yourself out there.
And I will do it more so because I don't want my courage to be constantly shattered by thoughts and lack of reality, because those thoughts and beliefs keep me from being who I am, authentic self. It's a theft, right? It steals my thunder. It steals who I am as an essence of human person that I am. And I know who I am is the person who has hands full of seeds standing there, putting it on the earth. And I know I can nurture those seedlings with my water because I have a lot of water to give. And when I do that, I create this beautiful garden or food, which is ample for everyone in the universe to have, because that's who I am. I want others to feel whole, good, enough, capable, loved. And sometimes I get into mischief. And that's where that courage comes from, Deb. It's because I don't want my light to be extinguished by water or the high wind that kind of flames it too high. I want it to be constant and productive in my work that I have. So, that's my plight, right? I was discouraged as a child, and I want every child around the world to feel capable, go through challenges. I don't want children to be catered to. I don't want them to have everything, because then they won't be their authentic self of who they're supposed to be. So this podcast is not about how we keep our child from developing this feelings of feeling discouraged at times, because that's going to happen.
Absolutely.
But we don't have them to feel traumatized over and over and over. And trauma is when you feel that you are no longer safe and you are down and out. But I want them to also know that sometimes when they do feel that way, they have the courage to get out of it, because I did. I've had crazy trauma. I'm not yet open to sharing about it, because I think we need to have trust between the folks who are listening and myself. So eventually we can do that. But I will tell you that we're making change around the world as teachers, as parents, and soon we can tell our governments to help, because when we have discouraged children, it takes more time, takes more effort to get them to grow and be who they authentically are. And it costs our government more money on mental health, and we're missing out on future capable people in our workforce, in our communities. So when we have healthy minds, we're going to have a healthy, sustainable community where we're going to be able to support one another. So sometimes we think we have to suppress, we have to oppress, we have to do a lot of these things, or punish the children so that they can learn. And I think the point is, yeah, sure, I was punished and I turned out fine. But if you lived inside of me, you can see the flames and fire. And that was very painful. And why would we do that to children? And not everyone's going to be resilient enough to survive that. So look at the children who won't be able to thrive as a result, because the pressure and the stresses will overwhelm them and keep them from being their best self. So children are born with 100 billion neurons. We know that, or more. And it's what we do with them. So creating safe inclusive environment where they feel capable, where they feel encouraged. And when we know what our mistakes and what are ways that our children can grow, I think those are all the things that got me all fired up, Deb. I don't even know if we were on topic, but I just felt a moment to share my thoughts.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
And I wanted to draw everybody's attention, including yours, to what you just did. You were speaking from your authentic self.
Yeah.
And that dialogue that you just shared with all of us, you were speaking from your authentic self, what is part of your soul's passion to bring onto this planet. You were speaking, that was courage, Yogi. That was from your courageous self, what you just did. I was like jumping up in joy, inside myself. If I was listening, I was like, yes. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going, yes. But I do want to call everybody's attention to what you just did. You've spoken, you were talking about, some of your pain earlier. And oftentimes when we go in, like, for instance, you said, I will apologize when there's nothing to apologize for.
Yeah.
Okay. That is speaking from the wound.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we apologize for our very presence on the planet.
That's right.
Okay? We are speaking from our wounds. What you just did, that everybody just had an opportunity to hear, you were speaking for the wound. You were saying, okay, I've experienced this. I know the pain of not feeling safe. I know the pain of being discouraged. And I don't want that for any person on this planet, in our children. I do not want this for our children. That is speaking for the wound. You are no longer a victim then. You are standing up and saying, I am gonna, this is my path. This is my goal on this planet. This is what I value. That was speaking for the wound. Bravo. I couldn't have gotten a more perfect example than what you just did.
Thank you. Thank you for reflecting, because I did feel heard and I felt the emotion as soon as you said it, because you never know what you said or how you said it when you get into that passionate, at least I don't, maybe others do. But then when someone reflects back what they got from it, you didn't say good job and great. You really listened to me. You validated what I had to say. You knew the nuggets. You saw what was the gem, right? The gem, and you pointed out that was a ruby and that was an emerald. And I think that if I can give to the parents on looking for what their children are doing super well, and it's telling them when they are capable. I know my dad would sit me on his lap after I've had a discouraged thing, and I was a challenged child. I was having some challenges, which we'll talk about one time. And my parents may or may not have known. And my dad would say, I would go into this anger and rage. And if you're a parent out there listening to this and knowing that your child has these big tantrums or yells or fights back, it's their way of sharing some pain that they're feeling, but they can't articulate it. And they think everyone knows it, but no one's helping. And they're angry. And my dad would sit me on his lap, and after he would scold me for not knowing my multiplications or whatever that was, always it was about some homework or something I did to embarrass them, because I used to dance using my sheets as a sorry, and they would have guests, and it was always, come on, could you quit it? And I couldn't. So
or wouldn't.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't, but even if I wanted to, my innate desire was to make others laugh and feel fun, joy. That was the entertainment quad, and others just didn't get the memo. So I would do all of this, and my dad would put me in his lap and say, we love you and you shouldn't do it this way or that way. And I remember being stubborn. I'm never going to forgive you. And my dad would stand by me. And my mother was so exhausted. She would always show her love through food, which I didn't know. She wouldn't come and coddle. She wasn't a very emotional person, but she would make your favorite meals. So I knew that I was loved and I knew I was important. Though somebody had told me, a cousin, when I was 12, that I was adopted, but because I had other pains that were going on, I latched onto I was adopted and I was different. And I kept looking for signals that I was adopted. Oh, I don't look like them. That's right. That's why they yell at me, because I am not their child. Of course, I was their child. But children go through different things because they don't know. And that's something that we pointed out in this podcast. And we've gone all over the place to talk about mistakes. And hopefully you, the listeners.
And those that are not mistakes, that are simply, I don't know, but I can learn.
Yes.
Right?
So why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't we just be curious and allow others to be different?
Instead of even calling a mistake. I wonder why that happened. Because yesterday you knew 2 + 2 = 4. What's going on that's different today? Now, of course, that does take time and patience, but I encourage all of us that are listening and listening to Yogi's wisdom here, and that is question everything. Heal yourself first, because the more we become whole and healed, like Yogi has been sharing, she's been going on this journey towards wholeness, towards authenticity, so then she can speak for the wounds that she experienced rather than from them. Mm-hmm. Each one of us, we will become a healthier, happier, whole parent by taking care of ourselves first. When I have said things or done things that were hurtful to my children, it was because of my own pain and my little girl that wasn't healed or even seen. Okay, she needed to be seen in order for me then to see my own children. Yeah. And I don't know if that's true for anybody else, but it certainly has been true for me. I so appreciate your wisdom, Yogi, and your vulnerability and your commitment to speaking for your wound to be of service to the children of our world.
Thank you. I hear you and I feel you. And thank you for always being so encouraging of not just me, but the whole community. And your wisdom is always really, really appreciated. And who you are, your light and your wisdom, your words are always to bring me up. I feel like I'm in yoga. And, when they say, imagine your hair is to the ceiling, I feel tall when I'm with you. So gratefully yours too. I'm Yogi Patel. Don't forget to press follow and listen to more. And Deb, I invite you to come and have more conversations, because we can always talk for hours about any topic.
I would be so honored, because I always learn from you.
Much love.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Deb. If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website, yogipateltte.com.